Hello and welcome dear viewers to the another topic on information related to drug substance properties and product development. So whenever we are developing a formulation or product, pharmaceutical product you may say, that time understanding of the drug substance properties is very important, and the drug substance properties have a great impact onto the formulation development way and the drug product development strategies, the manufacturing methods, and the overall product development revolves around the drug substance properties. For generic product development, along with the drug substance properties, the other material attributes are taken into consideration and the formulation is made which is inline to the reference formulation. So in this topic we will cover the drug substance related properties which are very much important while developing a formulation. So let's start with the video. See, the drug substance properties are divided into three categories mainly, like physical properties, chemical properties, and the biological properties. Also, I have made a separate slide on other properties which will discuss about the storage conditions, packaging related information, safety of the API and drug substance, and the other related important points. So in this slide we will see physical properties. The physical properties involves appearance, color. Is it a white color powder or yellow or brown or red? Whatever the color is there, that is the physical property. Then odor. Odor, or you can say it as smell, or the other properties like odorless. Is it a odorless powder or is it a uh, having some specific odor? So some formulations which are to be developed in the form of powder formulation, and if this API or drug substance has some odor, then it will impact the palatability and the patient compliance. That's why that odor or smell is considered. Then taste, if the taste masking or solution suspension pediatric formulations are made, that time taste is very important. If it is bitter in taste, then the formulation strategies to avoid the bitter taste to be taken into consideration. Then particle morphology. The particles are irregular shape or having a specific shape like plate like structure or tube like structure or the irregular shape or crystal shape. So these shape factors have impact on the packing properties, density, and the flow properties. Then particle size. Whether your API is coarser grade like 700 micron or 1000 micron or 800 micron, means you can say above 500 micron is a coarser grade, and below that you can say it as micronized powder, or below 100 micron it is very micronized powder or fine powder you can say. Then solid state form. So solid state form is a physical property, whether it is a polymorphic form or it is a mixture of polymorphs, or whether it is a single polymorph or is a amorphous crystalline form, or it is a pseudopolymorph or hydrate form or salt form. So these are the physical properties which have a impact onto the formulation development. Then the melting point. So how melting point will impact? Whenever there is a drug formulation manufacturing process which involves the drying uh, or conditioning, some steps are there in the manufacturing process. Whenever temperature is involved, that time melting point of the API is to be considered. and based on that melting point the process is required to be designed and taken further. So if the molecule is having low melting point, so that time the manufacturing method or process should be run at lower temperature, or sometimes the low melting point API may get degraded if it is stored at higher temperature or it is manufactured at higher temperatures. Then solubility in organic solvents. So solubility is a physical property, and I have divided solubility into number of solubility terminologies like solubility in organic solvents, solubility in lipids or oils, aqueous solubility as a function of pH, that is pH profiling, then intrinsic solubility, saturation solubility, and BCS solubility. So these are various types of solubilities, and solubility also serves as a identification test for some of the molecules. Then the BCS solubility. BCS solubility involves the four classes: BCS 1, 2, 3 and 4. Out of these four classes, BCS 1 and 3 are the molecules which show higher solubility, and the BCS 2 and 4 molecules show the lower solubility or poor solubility. Then hygroscopicity. So hygroscopicity means these molecules absorb the water and the water content may get increased. So for some of the molecules which are hygroscopic in nature, some precautions are required to be taken. Then density. Density is bulk density, tap density and the true density. So based on the density, the calculations of occupancies and all are done. So density is important factor. Then flow properties. Whenever there is a transport of the material from one to another or from one container to another container, or whenever mixing is there, or whenever there is a manufacturing process which uh, is mainly for the tablet and capsules or powders or granules or sachet filling, that time the flow property of the API is very important, and it affects the manufacturing ability or manufacturability of the formulation. If API content of the formulation is high, that time there is a very limited scope for improving the flow property of the API by the use of the manufacturing method or the excipients. Then in the chemical properties, chemical structure is there. Structure is required to be understood in detail. Chemical formula is required to be understood. Nowadays the risk assessment for nitrosamine is there, and for that risk assessment chemical structure is very important. Then the pH of the 1% solution or suspension, aqueous suspension is important as a pre-formulation parameter. Then pK is important. Chemical stability, whether the molecule is stable or not, and which are the conditions which lead to the degradation of the API. So these are very important. Then water content, loss on drying and the solvent content. Many of the time the molecules are hydrate, semi-hydrate or hemihydrate or dihydrate, trihydrate type of the molecules. Some of the time these are solvents like benzylate salt or ethanolate salt, or many salts are there and many solvents are there. So the water content, then the solvent content is very important for the calculation of the potencies. Then loss on drying is also important, as the loss on drying factor is involved in the potency calculations. So these are the chemical properties which are required to be understood in detail. Then in the chemical properties, force degradation and the sensitivity to the acid base, light, temperature, humidity, oxygen, these are the factors. If the drug substance is sensitive to acid, or base, that time the acidic and basic materials are required to be avoided. If it is sensitive to light, then protection from light is required. If it is sensitive to temperature, then the conditions which are involving the high temperature or thermal treatments, these are required to be avoided or controlled for shorter period of time if required. Then if oxygen sensitivity is there, then the oxygen stabilization is required. For that, the oxygen scavengers are to be used or nitrogen purging is required to be used. If humidity is the sensitivity for the molecule, that time the product is to be manufactured under low humidity conditions. Also generally that time the water is avoided in the formulation. Then impurity profile. Impurity profile means list of the impurities which involve the known, unknown impurities, metabolites as impurity, chiral impurities, and the elemental impurities, nitrosamines, genotoxic impurities, nitrite impurities. So these are some of the impurities. Then compatibility and incompatibility with the excipients. If in the literature you find that the specific excipient is very much degradant to the API, so that excipients are required to be avoided. If you know that the XYZ API is sensitive to the lactose, like Maillard reaction is there with lactose, that time, so these uh, excipients are required to be avoided or controlled. Then route of synthesis, that is called as ROS. ROS is nothing but the scheme of the synthesis of the API. How the API is synthesized, what intermediates are used, what are the conditions, crystallization conditions, temperature for the synthesis of the API. Then in elemental, impurities, the genotoxic impurities might be there, organic impurities, elemental impurities, then residual solvents might be there, and sometimes the impurities come from packaging material like extractables and the leachables. Then coming to the biological properties. So in biological properties, log P is there, which is known as partition coefficient. VCS class is there. Then dose and maximum daily dose. These are very much important for each of the molecule while developing a formulation. So dose and maximum daily dose may differ from different routes and from formulation to formulation. And this MDD, that is maximum daily dose, and daily dose is required for the calculation of impurities as per the ICH guidelines. Then route of administration and different formulations available for the API. If the API is available in suspension formulation and also in the capsule formulation and tablet formulation, that time you can understand that if the suspension is available for the API, so that API might be stable with water. If the suspension contains the water, then bioavailability, Cmax, Tmax, area under the curve, food effect, and biovariability are the critical biological properties for the drug substance based on the formulation and the route of administration. Then another is narrow therapeutic index drugs. That means for these drugs, small variation in the dose or absorption may lead to the low action or the higher action. That means the window for therapeutic concentration is very narrow. Then pharmacokinetic properties like absorption, distribution, metabolism, and elimination. Then pharmacokinetic linearity across strengths and the dosage strengths. Suppose the multiple strength product is having a strength of 10 mg, 20 mg, and 30 mg. Then whether these 10 mg, 20 mg, and 30 mg are linear in the pharmacokinetic range or not. Then permeability class. As per BCS, the class 3 and class 4 are low permeable. So the permeability class is required to be understood. Then stability and instability in the GIT. If the API is not stable in the GI environment, if it is susceptible or sensitive to the acid or base environment of the GIT, that time some special precautions are required to be taken. And if the API is sensitive to acid, that time mainly the acid resistance or gastro resistant or entity type of formulations are made. Then side and toxic effects are required to be understood and listed for each of the API. Then coming to the quality by design and the drug substance properties. So once you understand your drug substance and its properties and its impact onto the formulation, then you can derive the critical material attributes. Those are CMAs. If you are developing a formulation of BCS class 2 drug substance, then you can understand that the particle size will be the CMA, because particle size affects the dissolution rate and dissolution rate affects the biological action or pharmacological action. So these will be the CMAs, and once you identify the CMA, you have to study that CMA impact onto the formulation, that is CQS. Like you have taken a PhD, that is particle size distribution as a CMA, you will study the impact on dissolution, and based on that you will give the specifications. And then once the specifications are finalized, then the control strategy will be there for input material like API. That means you will derive the specification, and in each batch you will control the drug substance input through the control strategy. For example, you have fixed the particle size of D90 not more than 50 micron, then through the control strategy and specification, you will not take API with D90 of 60 micron into your batch manufacturing. Then coming to the other information. So other information involves packaging details and the requirements. Whether your drug substance is packed into the alu pouch or aluminum container, or it is packed into a light resistant container. Then storage condition and the recommendations. These are generally given by the vendor. So these are required to be understood. Then shelf life and the retest period. What is the shelf life of the API and what is the retest period? Then cost consideration and the vendor availability. Many of the times the patented APIs are there which are having high cost. So for high cost APIs, cost considerations will be there, and the vendor availability. Whether the vendors are available, multiple vendors are available or not, and also the patent and the laws. What are the laws regarding the API? What are the patents are available for the API? As these things will impact onto the development of the product. Whether the API is infringing or non-infringing. So these are the critical things which are required to be understood, and the detailed specifications are required to be made for these things, and based on that the development will proceed. Then whether the drug substance is a control type of drug substance or it is coming into narcotic substance, or is it a cytotoxic substance, or is it an anti-cancer drug substance, that is very important. Then OEL and OEB class, occupational exposure limits and occupational exposure band. These are the critical things whenever you are working or starting to work on the formulation with these type of drugs. If it is a cytotoxic molecule, then care should be required, and care is must while working on some of these type of formulations and the APIs. Then whether it is a orphan drug or the drug is of biological origin or animal origin, that is to be described, and always that is to be taken into consideration. Then special precautions during handling. Sometimes the materials are very fluffy in nature, or sometimes these are micronized in nature, sometimes these are toxic. So all these things are very critical when we are working onto the formulation. Then indications. What are the indication of these drug substances? Then MSDS, material safety data sheet. This material safety data sheet gives the clear cut understanding about the drug substance and what are the safety measures required and what are the toxicities. Then deactivation method or destruction method. So whenever working on the cytotoxic or anti-cancer materials or hormonal products or some biologically derived for drug substances, these are required to be destructed before uh, throwing into the nature or before giving it to the destruction. So that deactivation method should be there in place for these molecules. Then whether the API is hazardous or toxic material, that is to be understood, and as per that the safety measures are required to be taken. Also the training is required to be given to the people who are going to work with these type of the drug substances. So the API or drug substance is a key ingredient into the formulation, and that's why for effective product development and manufacturing, the API information is required to be understood by everyone, whoever are working onto the formulation and onto the drug substance. So let's meet again with such kind of informative videos. Till then, keep watching the Pharma Learning in Depth channel videos, and if you have any query, please feel free to comment. Thanks for watching the video.